After 25 years and over 1,000 episodes, the One Piece anime has become something of a paradox. It's simultaneously one of the most beloved and most criticized adaptations in anime history. While millions of fans worldwide have fallen in love with Luffy's journey, just as many have been driven away by one fundamental problem that's plagued the series for over a decade. The pacing is absolutely brutal. But what if there was a way to experience One Piece the way it was truly meant to be seen, without the endless padding, without the glacial storytelling, and without the animation inconsistencies that have frustrated fans for years? Well, that possibility just became reality when WIT Studio announced they're remaking One Piece from scratch. This is the same team that brought us the visceral intensity of Attack on Titan and the cinematic beauty of Vinland Saga. The question is simple, but loaded with implications. Can WIT Studio actually fix the One Piece anime? Because let's be honest, there's a lot that needs fixing. From the moment you start watching Toei's adaptation, you're hit with problems that have been building for over 2 decades. The pacing crawls at a snail's pace. The animation quality swings wildly from breathtaking to barely acceptable. Fight scenes that should leave you on the edge of your seat instead drag on for episodes with reaction shots that kill any momentum. And don't even get me started on those 5-minute recaps at the beginning of every episode. These aren't small issues we're talking about. I've seen countless discussions online where people who love manga refuse to touch the anime specifically because of these issues. That's a massive problem for what should be one of the greatest animated stories ever told. WIT Studio's approach to this remake represents something we rarely see in anime. They're not just touching up a few episodes or improving the animation quality. They're rebuilding the entire series from the ground up, starting with the East Blue Saga. This gives them a unique opportunity that most studios never get. They can fix everything that went wrong the first time around. By the way, if you like these kinds of breakdowns, consider subscribing. I do these every week, and that way you won't miss the next one. Let's start with the most obvious issue that WIT can address. The pacing problem that has haunted One Piece for over 15 years stems directly from Toei's need to avoid catching up to the manga. Their solution was to stretch single chapters across entire episodes, padding scenes with extended reaction shots, unnecessary flashbacks, and drawn-out dialogue sequences that suck the life out of Oda's storytelling. What should be intense, fast-paced adventures instead become endurance tests that require genuine dedication to sit through. WIT Studio doesn't have this problem. They're working with the complete story, which means they can adapt multiple chapters per episode when it makes narrative sense. They can let action sequences breathe without artificially extending them. They can cut away unnecessary padding and focus on what actually matters for the story. This alone could transform the viewing experience from something that feels like a chore into something that captures the genuine excitement of reading the manga. But pacing is just the beginning. WIT Studio has consistently demonstrated something that Toei has struggled with for years. They understand cinematic storytelling. When you watch Attack on Titan, every shot feels deliberately composed. The camera angles serve the story, the lighting creates atmosphere, the color palettes shift to match the emotional tone of each scene. This is filmmaking, not just animation. One Piece deserves this level of visual storytelling. Oda's manga is filled with iconic moments that should leave viewers speechless. Luffy's first use of Gear Second, Zoro's sacrifice on Thriller Bark, the walk to Arlong Park. These scenes have incredible emotional weight in the manga, but Toei's adaptation often dilutes their impact with inconsistent animation quality and poor directorial choices. WIT Studio has the opportunity to give these moments the cinematic treatment they deserve. The animation consistency issue is another area where WIT can make a massive difference. Toei's weekly schedule has resulted in wildly varying animation quality from episode to episode. Some episodes look absolutely stunning, while others barely meet broadcast standards. This inconsistency breaks immersion and makes the viewing experience feel unpredictable in all the wrong ways. WIT Studio's seasonal approach means they can maintain consistent quality standards throughout their adaptation. When you watch their previous works, you notice that the animation quality remains stable from the first episode to the last. Characters move with weight and purpose. Backgrounds are detailed and atmospheric. Action sequences have spatial clarity that makes them easy to follow while still being visually spectacular. Speaking of action sequences, this might be where WIT Studio can make their biggest impact. Toei's approach to fight scenes has become increasingly reliant on flashy effects and over-the-top animations that often obscure what's actually happening. Attacks create massive explosions of light and energy, that look impressive but lack the physical weight and impact that make fights feel real and consequential. WIT Studio's approach to action is fundamentally different. When you watch the fights in Attack on Titan or Vinland Saga, every movement has weight behind it. You can feel the impact of each blow. The choreography is clear and easy to follow while still being dynamic and exciting. They understand that the best action sequences aren't just about spectacle, they're about character development, emotional stakes, and storytelling through movement. One Piece's fight scenes should feel personal and meaningful. When Luffy throws a punch, it should carry the weight of his determination and the hopes of everyone counting on him. When Zoro draws his swords, the tension should be palpable. The technical aspects of animation are another area where WIT can elevate the source material. Their understanding of lighting, color grading, and visual effects could bring new life to One Piece's world. The Grand Line should feel like a place of wonder and danger. Each island should have its own distinct visual identity that reflects its culture and atmosphere. WIT Studio's attention to environmental storytelling could make the world of One Piece feel more lived in and authentic than it ever has before. Sound design and music integration represent yet another opportunity for improvement. While One Piece has an incredible soundtrack, Toei's implementation often feels repetitive and poorly timed. The same musical cues get overused, and emotional moments sometimes lack the sonic support they need to reach their full impact. Character development represents another massive opportunity for WIT Studio to showcase their storytelling prowess. Toei's approach often reduces character moments to simple exposition dumps or overly dramatic reactions that feel disconnected from the actual emotional core of scenes. When Nami finally asks for help during the Arlong Park arc, or when Robin declares she wants to live at Eni's lobby, these moments should hit like emotional sledgehammers. Instead, they sometimes get lost in poor timing, awkward animation, or excessive padding that dilutes their impact. The studio's track record with ensemble casts is particularly relevant here. One Piece features an enormous roster of characters who each deserve their moment to shine, but Toei's adaptation often struggles to balance screen time effectively. Supporting characters get reduced to single personality traits, while main characters sometimes disappear for episodes at a time without meaningful development. WIT Studio has consistently demonstrated their ability to juggle multiple character arcs simultaneously without losing narrative focus or emotional coherence. When they adapt One Piece, viewers could finally get the full depth of characters, like Usopp's growth or Sanji's complex relationship with his past, without having these arcs stretched beyond recognition or compressed into forgettable montages. However, WIT Studio's involvement in this remake isn't without potential concerns that deserve serious consideration. Their history with long-running projects reveals a troubling pattern that could spell disaster for One Piece fans. The studio has repeatedly started ambitious adaptations only to abandon them after a few seasons, leaving other studios to pick up the pieces and continue the story. Attack on Titan represents the most prominent example of this issue. WIT Studio delivered 3 incredible seasons that established the series as a modern masterpiece, then handed the project over to MAPPA for the final season. While the transition wasn't catastrophic, it did result in noticeable changes to the animation style, character designs, and overall visual approach that some fans found jarring. The same pattern emerged with Vinland Saga. WIT Studio created a visually stunning first season that captured the brutal beauty of medieval warfare and the emotional complexity of Thorfinn's journey, only to pass the series to MAPPA for subsequent seasons. Again, while the new studio maintained quality standards, the shift in visual style and directorial approach created discontinuity that affected the viewing experience. For One Piece, this pattern could be absolutely devastating. The series spans over 1,000 chapters, with multiple major story arcs that each deserve consistent treatment. If WIT Studio follows their established pattern and abandons the project after adapting the East Blue Saga or the first few major arcs, fans could be left with a beautifully animated beginning that gets handed off to a different studio with different priorities and aesthetic sensibilities. The scale of One Piece makes this concern even more pressing. Unlike Attack on Titan or Vinland Saga, which have defined endpoints, One Piece is still ongoing with no clear conclusion in sight. Any studio taking on this adaptation needs to commit to seeing the project through to completion, not just delivering a few impressive seasons before moving on to other projects. WIT Studio's president George Wada has acknowledged this pattern in past interviews, explaining that their decisions to leave projects often came down to scheduling conflicts and business considerations rather than creative differences. The studio's relatively small size, compared to animation giants like MAPPA or Toei, means they have limited capacity to juggle multiple large-scale projects simultaneously. This raises serious questions about their long-term commitment to the One Piece remake. Are they viewing this as a passion project that deserves their full dedication, or is it simply another high-profile assignment that they'll complete professionally before moving on to the next opportunity? The answer to this question could determine whether the remake becomes the definitive version of One Piece or just an expensive false start that creates more problems than it solves. The studio's reliance on computer-generated imagery presents another potential pitfall that could undermine their adaptation. While WIT Studio does lean on CG for ships, crowds, and complex shots in series like Vinland Saga, the results are usually well integrated, rather than outright jarring, though the CG can still stand out in a few key scenes. One Piece's world demands a careful balance between traditional animation techniques and modern digital enhancement. The series features everything from intimate character moments to massive naval battles involving hundreds of characters. If WIT Studio leans too heavily on CGI for crowd scenes, ship battles, or devil fruit abilities, they risk creating the same sense of disconnection that plagued some of their earlier projects. The studio has shown improvement in this area with more recent works, but One Piece represents a much larger canvas with more varied demands than anything they've tackled before. Every devil fruit power needs to feel unique and tactile. Every island should have its own distinct visual personality. Every major battle should feel epic without losing the personal stakes that drive the emotional core of each conflict. Meanwhile, as WIT Studio works on their remake, Toei Animation isn't sitting idle. The original studio has announced significant changes to their approach that could potentially address many of the same issues that WIT Studio aims to fix. Their decision to move from a weekly release schedule to a seasonal format represents the most dramatic shift in One Piece's production approach since the series began. This change could eliminate the fundamental pacing problems that have plagued the series for over a decade. With seasonal breaks built into their schedule, Toei can plan entire arcs in advance, rather than scrambling to avoid catching up to the manga. They can allocate proper time and resources to major episodes instead of maintaining the same rushed weekly production cycle that has resulted in inconsistent quality. Toei has also begun remastering older arcs with improved pacing, condensing the infamous Fishman Island arc from 57 episodes down to 21 while maintaining all the essential story beats. This demonstrates they're finally acknowledging the pacing issues that have frustrated fans for years and taking concrete steps to address them. But here's where things get complicated for WIT Studio's remake. If Toei continues this trajectory and successfully implements seasonal formatting while remastering problematic arcs, the fundamental justification for a complete remake starts to weaken. Why invest years waiting for WIT Studio to slowly work through the early arcs, when Toei could potentially deliver the same improvements to the existing series in a fraction of the time? The timing of these developments creates an interesting dynamic. Netflix announced the WIT Studio remake at the end of 2023, but since August 2024, there have been virtually no meaningful updates about the project's progress. No new concept art, no production timelines, no casting announcements. Meanwhile, Toei has been making headlines with their concrete plans for improving the series starting in 2026. This silence from WIT Studio is particularly concerning when you consider the scope of what they're attempting. One Piece isn't like adapting a single season of a completed manga. They're taking on a decades-spanning epic that's still actively being written. The logistics alone should require constant communication with fans about progress, challenges, and creative decisions. The lack of updates suggests either the project is facing significant behind-the-scenes problems, or Netflix and WIT Studio are having second thoughts about the viability of competing with an improved version of Toei's adaptation. Neither scenario bodes well for fans who are hoping the remake would provide a definitive solution to One Piece's anime problems. Managing the complexities I mentioned earlier while maintaining the cinematic quality that WIT Studio is known for represents a massive scaling challenge. Can they really deliver the same attention to detail across hundreds of episodes that they brought to their shorter, more focused projects? The track record suggests this might be where their approach breaks down. Their character animation excels in quiet, dialogue-heavy scenes where subtle facial expressions and body language carry emotional weight. But One Piece demands this same level of care during massive battle sequences involving dozens of fighters, complex environmental destruction, and supernatural powers that bend the laws of physics. The studio's previous work hasn't really tested their ability to maintain character nuance during large-scale action sequences. differences, the art direction challenges are equally daunting. One Piece's world design philosophy deliberately embraces visual chaos and overwhelming detail. Islands are packed with bizarre architecture, strange creatures, and cultural elements that reflect Oda's maximalist approach to world building. WIT Studio's more restrained, cinematic aesthetic might actually work against the source material's intentionally overwhelming visual density. Consider how different the whole Cake Island arc would look under WIT Studio's direction compared to Toei's adaptation. Toei's version, despite its pacing problems, captures the candy-coloured excess and surreal architecture that makes Big Mom's territory feel appropriately nightmarish. WIT Studio's more grounded approach to lighting and colour grading might make the same locations feel too realistic and lose the fairy tale horror that Oda intended. The studio's approach to devil fruit abilities presents another potential mismatch. One Piece's power system deliberately defies logical physics in favour of creative visual storytelling. Luffy's rubber powers, Zoro's superhuman strength, and Brook's soul-based abilities all require animation that embraces cartoonish exaggeration over realistic movement. So can WIT Studio actually fix the One Piece anime? The potential is absolutely there. They have the technical skills, the cinematic vision, and the opportunity to rebuild this legendary story from scratch without the constraints that have held Toei back for decades. But potential and execution are two very different things. And the silence surrounding this project is becoming more deafening by the day. Whether we get the definitive One Piece adaptation we've all been waiting for, or just another incomplete project, remains to be seen. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. As always, thank you for watching.